bring in tonight's Hardball Roundtable. Tara Dowdell is a Democratic strategist. Evan Siegfried is a Republican strategist. Caitlin Huey-Burns is a political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Caitlin, let's just start on that statement from Mike Pence. They were not too happy in the vice president's office about this story. The story was basically saying that Mike Pence is doing an awful lot of political work out there, that Mike Pence maybe is trying to set himself up if Donald Trump doesn't run to make sure he's the candidate. I think one thing we know for sure, Donald Trump doesn't like this kind of story.
Exactly. I was going to say, I think that statement was geared towards Donald Trump himself, saying, look, I'm not doing this out of... What's really interesting here is you don't take the job of vice president because you want to be vice president, right? Most people envision themselves in that role eventually, and by law, you could become president one day. What's interesting about this, though, is, of course, how early it is, but also Mike Pence is in contrast to Donald Trump in so many ways, so loyal to the party, knows how these things work, knows how you have to gear up for these sorts of things, and he's kind of been running a counter sort of presidency, if you will, in some cases. We saw him visiting former Soviet countries last week, talking tough on Russia, presenting an alternate message or a tougher message than the president was. You've also seen him distance himself in some respects. Remember when the Don Jr. stuff came out, he said, look, I wasn't part of that campaign at that time, releasing a statement, but he's also remaining very loyal to him.
Let me get to our partisans down here. Let me put it this way. Why do I feel like we are having the same conversation and it just sort of the context of it changes? What I mean is this. In the campaign last year during the primaries, it was, okay, the Republicans are going to consolidate, the non-Trump Republicans are going to consolidate, and they're going to produce Paul Ryan as the sort of the last-minute nominee. They're going to go to the convention. These unbound delegates are going to stop Donald Trump right there. That was going to be the thing that was going to happen. Or then in the fall, when the Access Hollywood tape came out, well, guess what? Donald Trump's going to have to leave the race right now. It's going to be Mike Pence. They're going to pick somebody else. There's always a scenario, it seems, Evan, where the Republican Party is about to regain control over Donald Trump. It just seems like the latest iteration of something we've seen 1,000 times before. Why would this be any different?
I don't think it would be different. I think Bill Kristol's group is a fool's errand, and it's just folly. I think what is really doing a good job of really dividing the party is President Trump. He's been weak on everything. He has not provided leadership. Republicans are sick and tired of having to answer every time for any of his tweets. If you have a Republican on to talk about health care, or who wants to talk about health care, pardon me, they're going to have to actually say, you're going to probably be asking them about the latest crazy thing the president has tweeted. And that sucks the oxygen out of the room, and Republicans are frustrated. They don't have a White House that is really working with them or producing any sort of results. So we really don't see him as a powerful president.
It just feels, Tara, though, like there's just this disconnect. This has been the story to me for Trump, has been this disconnect between Republican elites, whatever you want to call them, elected officials, and Republican voters. Republican voters kind of knew this was what they were getting when they voted for him.
Trump's base isn't going anywhere. I know people are reporting that the numbers are slipping and this is happening. Trump's base is with Trump. And if Trump runs for re-election, barring any kind of really, really super extreme thing from happening, because already big extreme things have already happened, barring anything just completely out of the orbit, Donald Trump, if he runs for re-election, his base will be with him. And they will be mad if someone primaries him. And so while I do think that Mike Pence probably is running a shadow campaign because the House is on fire, and that's clearly not lost on Mike Pence. So while I do think he's running a shadow campaign, I don't see him primarying Donald Trump. I see him biding his time, waiting in the wings, along with a bunch of other Republicans, too, I might add, in case something happens, impeachment or something like that.
Well, so, but okay, let me just open question to the panel here. Can anybody think of any Republican out there who is likely or just plausibly going to challenge Donald Trump in 2020 and would actually have a plausible chance of winning? Can we think of a name? Is there a name we can put out there? I've heard Kasich. I said Kasich could barely win his home state against Trump.
Exactly. I was going to say Kasich is the only one that seems to be actually making those kinds of moves, and without any fear, right? Because as you pointed out, he didn't win. You do have different kinds of Republicans. You have the Pences, the Tom Cotton. Remember, Tom Cotton was touring Iowa during the campaign. Nobody really thought that Trump would win. You have those guys who have been very loyal to Donald Trump. Then you have the Ben Sasses of the world who never wanted to support him anyway. But to your point earlier is that there's also this disconnect between Republicans in Washington and elsewhere and the state parties. Talk to state party chairs. They are happy with Trump. You heard the Republican Party chair in Iowa yelling at Ben Sasse for criticizing the president. I think you're going to see more of that.
Can we also point out that a lot of people are missing that there's a civil war in the GOP that's been quietly raging? You have Republicans who...
Well, it's not too quiet, is it?
No, it is, because we lost from December 2015 to March 2017, the Republican Party contracted. We lost 23% of Republicans aged 18 to 29, and that coincides with the rise of Trump. There's a lot of Republicans, especially younger, who don't feel there's a place for them at the table because the party has shifted, and I think the party has contracted among other generations. Why you see the more alt-right, the Stephen Miller factions, as well as the Mike Cernoviches claim that they're Republicans versus people more along the lines of myself, the Bill Kristols, and others.
I just think there is this undertone that's out there in a lot of the sort of thinking among Republican leaders. It spills over into the coverage a lot. They're just waiting for Donald Trump to pack it up and go away. And I think we got to reach a point here where whether you like the guy or you hate the guy, I don't think he's going away anytime soon. And the roundtable is staying with us. They're not going away, though. Up next, a former news commentator joins Trump TV to deliver the, quote, real news. Critics are already pushing back, but does it help him manage the message he's trying to sell his base? This is Hardball, where the action is. Welcome back to Hardball. The Trump campaign yesterday launched a so-called real news series on the president's Facebook page. And while President Trump still needs an official White House communications director, the Associated Press's Jonathan Lemire points out that it is Trump who's the White House's leading expert and the final word on what and how he communicates with the public. Despite decrying most negative media coverage as fake news and personally insulting members of the media, he has inserted himself into the White House's press operations in an unprecedented fashion for a president. We're back with Tara, Evan, and Caitlin. And Tara, I mean, that is ultimately with Donald Trump. I mean, we were talking about this earlier with the Mueller investigation. You can have all the discipline you want on the legal team in the White House, but if that's not going to stop the president from going out there when he feels like it or when he's irked and firing off 20 tweets, well, the same thing applies doubly when it comes to communications message. You could have the most disciplined operation in the world. If Donald Trump wakes up in the wrong mood and he's holding that phone in his hand, all bets are off.
And if you add to that the fact that Donald Trump thinks that he's the best communication strategist out there, right? He thinks he's better than everyone. And for a long time, he was able to control, he still controls the story, but even before he entered politics, for decades, Donald Trump made himself part of the news cycle. So he feels like that's how he, that's how he survived a lot of his business losses, was that the bank said, hey, we'll still support you if you continue to market the product, and they installed other people to run his businesses, something a lot of people don't know. And so he knows that that saved him and saved him throughout his career, this ability to garner media coverage. So there's no way he's going to let up on that or allow someone else to control his media.
And it feels to me like, Evan, there's been this ingredient with Trump where what we would call typically in politics being on message discipline, sticking to the script, whatever you want to call it, he equates that with boring, and he equates boring with just sort of death, political death.
Well, he's come up and he thinks it's all ratings and what covers you get. Remember, he came up and he was mastering the press of New York, but it was the tabloid press, the New York Daily News and the New York Post. He's always craved the New York Times' attention and for them to take him seriously. And he's going out, and every off-base tweet that he goes out and pushes gets that attention, and he loves the attention. And then he gets upset when people say, well, maybe he should stop tweeting. The problem a lot of Republicans have isn't the fact that he tweets, it's what he tweets. If he were able to focus that, we'd have a lot more results. He never even tried to help to pass the BCRA or any of these other things. We're going to see it happen again in tax reform. We're going to see it happen again with the budget.
Well, that is something interesting about him, too, is for all the media bashing, all the sort of going after what you might call the elite media, he still gives those interviews to the New York Times, and I think there is definitely something there. There's this old
presidency wants to have a...
he's been the tabloid guy in New York, but he wants to talk. He wants to be taken seriously by the New York Times. He wants that stamp of establishment approval. Very interesting psychological story with our president. We are back with the Hardball Roundtable. Tara, tell me something I don't know.
The Google manifesto that came out with a Google employee saying that women are inferior, and that's why there are not as many women software engineers.
All right, Evan.
Well, we're seeing the Capitol Hill stand up to the president on the FAA reauthorization and the FDA reauthorization, and many Republican aides are showing through ignoring the White House, that it's going to be a lame duck presidency already.
Caitlin, very
It's
quick.
recess and keeping a close eye on retirements that might come out from members of Congress. We already saw a few that have announced for governor. Keep an eye on that. Gives us an indication of the mood.
All right, Caitlin, Evan, Tara, thank you.